Between 1991 and 1998, Batman and Judge Dredd crossed over 4 times. The first was 1991's Batman Judge Dredd Judgement on Gotham. And this wasn't just the first Judge Dredd crossover, but it was also the first time 2000 AD had done an intercompany crossover with anyone. Batman Judge Dredd has its roots back in the late 1980s when DC Comics started poaching all of these young British comics creators. I'm sure you've heard of this. This later became known as the British Invasion. It featured creators like Alan Moore, Grant Morrison, Dave Gibbons, Brian Bolland, Dave McKean, Jamie Delano, Pete Milligan. The list goes on. I think it's important to remember here that all of these lads had previously worked at 2000 AD, and the energy they brought with them from 2000 AD really defined this era of DC Comics. Classic, all-time Batman stories like The Killing Joke or Arkham Asylum are a direct result of the British invasion. Apparently, Alan Moore and Brian Bolland had been teed up to do a Batman Judge Dredd crossover before they'd even made The Killing Joke. The Judgement on Gotham that we got, though, is still another British invasion banger. Written by Alan Grant and John Wagner with fully painted interiors by Simon Bisley. Not only had Grant and Wagner written most of the best Judge Dredd stories, but at this point in time they'd also crossed over into America and they'd been writing Batman together for 3 years. Ventriloquist, Ratcatcher, Scarface, these are all Grant Wagner creations. And what can I say about Simon Bisley except for he is absolutely iconic. Another invading Brit, American comic fans might best know Bisley as the guy who took Lobo from this to this. And when it comes to drawing Batman, he knows that long ears matter. The first page of Judgement on Gotham is the perfect opener. 2 lovers getting murdered by a horrible monster who you might in fact recognise as Judge Death, one of Judge Dredd's greatest adversaries. Bisley's colour choices here, his distended figures, the way we burst from this tiny 6-panel POV into this lurid half-page of violence, the composition, the rhythm, his panel work. Quality, mate. I love that the GCPD just turn up in this sports car and they get out holding these massive guns, smoking stogies. It's all just so OTT, I love it. It is going to be a real challenge not to talk about every panel and every page in this book, but suffice to say, Bisley keeps this level of intensity throughout the entire thing, and it's amazing. Speaking of, when Batman does actually turn up, he immediately puts Judge Death into a monkey flip and then impales him on a set of iron bars, which, brilliant. He's a little bit upset because he thinks he's killed somebody, but the grisly figure then rises from the dead, its spirit leaving its body before delivering the message.
Fools, you cannot kill what does not live. I have come to judge this city. Judgment will be carried out. All will die.
Searching Death's lifeless body, Batman finds out what turns out to be a teleportation device and then accidentally teleports himself to the towering, insane-looking Megacity 1. I just want to slow down for a second here because we're like 4 pages in and there's ghosts, there's mega cities, the fucking Mean Machine Angel makes an appearance. I can't help thinking that if you were a Batman fan and you came to this without any context of 2000 AD, then you'd feel pretty out of your depth here. The fact that Bisley refuses to take his foot off the gas with all this stuff as well means this must be a really overwhelming book. But I do think that's a good thing. I think you'd feel like Batman, right? You're thrust into this new world, you've got no idea what's going on, you've had no prep time. So I feel like that's kind of how the book's supposed to feel. I mean, this certainly isn't a critique of the work. Wagner and Grant know exactly what they're doing. Technically, this story does follow on from the Necropolis event from Judge Dredd comics, but I don't actually think you'd need to know that or know what happens in that story to jump right into this and start having a really good time. It gets worse for old Brucey. Dredd soon turns up and immediately goes in on Batman, just as he would any other lunatic in Megacity 1. And I love this. Vigilantism is illegal in Megacity 1, and all crime must be punished to the full extent of the law. And yeah, I figure vigilantism is also illegal in Gotham too, but there is a crucial difference here. Commissioner Gordon isn't an absolute psychopath who rides around on a motorbike day and night, frothing at the bit just at the thought of whacking criminals over the head with his wooden stick. And that really is the fundamental difference between these two characters. I love the discourse that Batman is a fascist. I love the fact that we can have conversations about this man who roams around at night beating up poor people, but also a man who uses illegal surveillance without any permission or any consent, somebody who operates entirely without oversight, without any accountability, whether or not that character would count as a fascist. You might not agree, but I think we could probably agree that he is at least authoritarian. He is shown directly battling the symptoms of crime, but he isn't really shown to be doing anything to address the societal conditions which lead to crime. Nor do we really see him doing an awful lot to combat the white-collar crime which leads to Gotham's rife inequality. So he is at the very least complicit with the status quo. What makes this debate really funny though is if you pick Batman up and you drop him down in Megacity 1, he doesn't really feel very fascist at all. In fact, if you compare him to Dredd, I mean, he feels kind of quaint really. So instead, we get a much more interesting debate, and that is law versus justice. Batman breaks the law to deliver what he considers to be justice. You know, he works outside the confines of legality to deliver what he thinks of as the right thing. But Dredd never really considers what's the right thing to do, only what is lawful and unlawful. With very few exceptions, and at this point in time, even fewer, Dredd just always does what the law tells him to do, whether it's the right thing to do or not. If the law told him to kick a baby off of a roof, he probably would. There's certainly a lot less debate about whether Judge Dredd is a fascist, when he himself works for an openly fascist organisation, and he himself doesn't really consider that much of a criticism. There's a lot of great friction between these two characters and their fundamentally different worldviews. It isn't really explored a lot in this comic, but it brings those themes up for me, and it makes me enjoy it that much more. Dredd calls in Side Judge Anderson to help him figure out what's going on. It is a little bit male-gazy. We don't really ever see Dredd, hanging out of bed with his arse in view, but what I do like is that Bisley draws Anderson as absolutely fucking ripped. I think it makes total sense in this world, and it's just so cool. Anderson figures out that Judge Death, who had been missing since the events of Necropolis, was now loose in Gotham City. So, before Batman is sent to the ISO cubes, she breaks him out, and together they head back to Gotham, with Dredd in tow. Back in Gotham, we see Judge Death meeting with the Scarecrow, and we're really just Jeff Loebing as many characters as we can in here, right? I have to say, this Scarecrow design is absolutely horrifying. I love it so much. It's even better than the new Batman Adventures design, and it is completely unlike what the main Batman comics were doing at the time. I love it. I also love that Death initially tries to kill the Scarecrow, but then Scarecrow hits him with the old fear toxin, and then we get this great page where we're shown the kind of stuff that Judge Death, the immortal mass-murdering spirit of vengeance, could possibly be afraid of. And it's brilliant. The finale of the book sees Judge Death descending on a metal concert, which gives Bisley carte blanche to cut loose and draw some of the most unhinged shit imaginable. Not that this book hasn't been entirely unhinged the whole time, of course, but Bisley shows us he had no intention of coming off the gas, and he delivers beautiful work right to the last page. There is a great story in Thrill Power Overload about how this comic almost got canned because of how long Bisley was taking to paint those pages. DC had said there weren't going to be any new Batman comics in 1992 because that was the year Batman Returns was coming out and they needed to focus everything on the film. So that meant that the book needed to be published in 1991, and in order for that to happen, all of the artwork needed to be with DC by Thanksgiving. Apparently, Bisley was having ice baths on the run-up to this so he could stay awake day and night while working on these paintings. In the end, the artwork was hand-delivered by Concord, arriving in DC's offices with literally 4 hours to go before going to print. And he's not holding back or cutting any corners towards the end of this book. We've got some great full-page paints as Batman and Anderson bring down Scarecrow and Mean Machine, and once Dredd turns up, all three of them combine their efforts to finally bring death in. With the situation resolved, Dredd and Anderson head back to Mega City 1, but not before Dredd attempts to drag Batman back there with them to throw him in the cubes. He may well have helped to bring about justice, but he still broke the law. I love that Dredd is just a total dickhead right to the last. Anderson, of course, convinces Dredd to let Batman off the hook, and with a cheeky little "see you around," there ends the first Batman Judge Dredd crossover. Does Batman finish this tale changed? No. Does Dredd? Absolutely not. But that wasn't the assignment. Grant and Wagner are just bringing these characters together and having some fun with them. If I'm totally honest, it's Anderson who steals the show for me here. She is so genuinely charismatic. She is such an interesting character to spend time with. And when you put her next to Dredd, she just makes him look like a cardboard cutout by comparison. What can I say? I like my badass psychic muscle mummy. Judgement on Gotham sold really well by all accounts. 200,000 copies in North America, 500,000 by the end of the decade. Simon Bisley went on to win an Eisner for Best Artist for this, so obviously a sequel was greenlit immediately. Batman Judge Dredd 2 Die Laughing would bring the Joker into the mix and would be released early in 1993. Die Laughing was pitched as a prestige format two-parter, a bit like Batman vs Predator, which had come out the previous year. Lovely, big UK size here, smaller American size there. But DC had learned their lesson. They weren't going to hire that loose cannon Simon Bisley to do the artwork for this one. They loved the painted aesthetic. They really wanted to continue that tradition, but they needed an artist that they could trust who could bring this art in on time. I imagine the conversation went a little bit like this.
The readers loved that Simon Bisley art, but it was a nightmare getting it in on time. And we want to keep that painted look, so who else can we use?
Well, what about Glenn Fabry? He's another 2000 AD artist. He did painted interiors for Slain, so, he's kind of like Simon Bisley.
Oh yeah, no, he'll do great. Let's get him to do it.
Long story short, DC soon learned that no matter who is doing the artwork, fully painted interiors take a long time to do. Glenn Fabry was not going to get this book done in time for 1993. So the second Batman Judge Dredd crossover was 1993's Vendetta in Gotham. Commissioned at the last minute as a stopgap until Die Laughing could be finished, Vendetta was nonetheless written by super team Grant and Wagner and drawn by one of my all-time favourite illustrators, Cam Kennedy. DC knew that Cam's sketchier pen and ink style meant that he could turn pages around quickly and he would be able to hit their deadline. Most of the story is just JD and Bats having a big fist fight on top of a train, but to be honest, that's kind of great. This feels very much more like a one-shot, like throwing your action figures into the tumble dryer kind of deal. There is some plotting here, something to do with ventriloquist and a bomb and a newspaper sent back in time, but really it's just an excuse to let Kennedy work to his strengths, which is laying out these incredible fight scenes. Even dropping dialogue altogether to let us enjoy two hunks going hell for leather on each other. On the last page of the story, Dredd reveals that he'd been sent back in time because one of the side judges had had a premonition. The day will soon come where Dredd will need Batman's help. If you want to read more, then check out Judgement 3 Die Laughing, which will be out next year. Yeah, it wasn't. Glenn Fabry had taken 2 years to get the art for Die Laughing done, and at this point, it still wasn't complete. So DC just commissioned another story to keep the fires of public interest burning. Grant and Wagner returned to the fold again, and this time the artwork would be painted by Carl Critchlow. Which is great because two of the artists who worked on Batman Judge Dredd comics also made artwork for the 1994 PC game Ecstatica. That's not relevant, I just think it's really cool. Ultimate Riddle is one of those ultimate showdown of Ultimate Destiny comics, where characters are kidnapped from across the multiverse and then they're forced to fight in a Conquest of Champions style gladiator arena. It's been done so many times, I honestly think we could list like 100 films, TV shows, comics, computer games, whatever, that all use this central framing conceit. In fact, if you can think of one, stick it in the comments and let's actually see if we can get to 100. This is another story where the writing doesn't really do very much, but it's the artwork that sings. Critchlow's crazy alien designs are just so sick. I love this Warhammer-looking motherfucker right here. About 15 pages from the end of the story, the art switches to Dermot Power, and then the final reveal is, honestly, the most mental contrivance I think I've ever read in a comic. Truthfully though, I don't think anybody really cared about this story making sense. It is very much just a vehicle to have some very cool action, some really sick painted artwork. It really is just much more about the vibe, and it brings that in droves. The final page ends with Dredd saying that lying to a judge carries a sentence of 4 years, and I can't help but feel that somehow this is a cheeky jab at Glenn Fabry, who at this point had spent 4 years painting Die Laughing. In Alan Grant's words, Glenn Fabry had turned an 8-month job into a 5-year slog, and he hadn't even finished issue 1 before he was replaced. Die Laughing was written and was marketed as a direct sequel to Judgement on Gotham, the first Batman Dredd crossover. Jim Murray and Jason Braziel helped to finish out issue 1, with Murray then going on to paint all of issue 2. It opens with the Joker in a brilliant outfit design, acquiring the D-jump belt which Scarecrow used to jump to Mega City 1 in Judgement on Gotham. Now, say what you like about Fabry's pace, but I think the work here speaks for itself. This stuff is awesome, and Joker's grin here is just evil. Joker arrives in Mega City 1 just as the Mega City judges are driving the encased spirits of the Dark Judges to a secret facility to bury them forever. If you want to know a bit more about the Dark Judges, or why their spirits are encased in crystals like something out of Ghostbusters, then I've made a video about them which you can check out here. Obviously, Joker ends up stealing the Dark Judges' spirits, and I just love this sequence where he breaks them out of their crystals and sorts them out with new bodies. This is probably some of the most badass Dredd art I've ever seen. The ghostly forms of the Dark Judges, the sickly green mist of the dead fluids, the Dark Judges rising from their graves. I love Fabry's choice to almost never have more than 4 panels on a page. It gives room for his artwork to breathe, and it also lets him go into so much more detail. This segment is then topped off with the most epic finale to Fabry's run. I'm so glad that he got to paint Joker's reward for helping Judge Death, and that is the creation of the 5th Dark Judge, Judge Joker. Issue 2 opens with the Dark Judges doing what they do best, and that's going ham on all these people, just like Denethor did with all those tiny little tomatoes. The book is packed with inventive ways for the Dark Judges to kill vast sums of people, and Jim Murray paints this all with such relish. There's a real sense of enjoyment of all this horrid, gratuitous violence. That shift in tone towards the comedic is kind of the perfect way to integrate Joker into the world of 2000 AD, and when Joker reveals that he has the power to pop people's heads just by laughing, well, that just so neatly closes the loop on what this book was trying to do. When I spoke about the Dark Judges before, I was digging into quite a lot of dark themes that I thought the Judges represented. Now, I think the Dark Judges represent the concept of police overreach, but kind of like through the lens of a slasher villain. But the Dark Judges had been around for long enough at this point that impact was starting to wear a little bit thin. Necropolis had been a huge event with a massive body count, but it also served as a really nice way to round out the Dark Judges as meaningful villains. Like with any other slasher, you can't really keep escalating after a certain point. Repeat sequels aren't really about scaring the audience anymore. Eventually it becomes about indulging them with all these gross, grisly kills, letting them lean into the carnage rather than shying away from it. Wagner and Grant knew this, and so they treat these villains like little rubber gremlins that we can laugh at and enjoy, rather than apocalyptic horrors that we should be frightened of. The most interesting thing about this book is Judge Joker. The idea that any character can be like dark judgerized, well, that's just fuel for the imagination, you know, fuel for fan art, stuff like that. I think that's awesome. Of course, it's reversed by the end of the book because DC want to maintain the status quo, but Die Laughing is still a really good comic book, which allows us to lean into some of the sillier elements, both of Batman and of Judge Dredd. Not everything needs to mean something, not everything needs to be profound. Sometimes just existing or just having a good time is a good enough reason for art to exist. And that's one of the reasons I love comics so much, is because we can get both. If you want to read these stories yourself, then they have been published many times over the years on both sides of the Atlantic. DC put out a big collection of these not too long ago, but I actually think it'd be better to track down the bigger UK format books, mostly because it allows the artwork to sing in that bigger print size. Batman Judge Dredd is a great window into some of the maybe lesser known British invasion creators. And if for no other reason, you should read these for these fully painted interiors. This really isn't the kind of thing that survived into the modern era. And so for these stories to be almost entirely painted by some of the best names in the biz, well, I think that makes Batman Cross Dredd a real landmark comic. Before we close out, I'd like to thank my more recent supporters on Patreon, CrispySteve42 and Evie Weevy Deevy. Evie has joined the Sticker Squad tier, so that means she'll be getting some sick new stickers designed by me sent to her in the post, as well as getting her name at the end of the video and all the other perks that come with supporting the channel. If you'd like to see your name here or you'd like to support the channel in any way, there are links in the description for places that you can become a channel contributor. Thank you so much for watching all the way to the end. If you want to see more videos about Judge Dredd or about British comics or comics in general, then please check out some of my previous uploads, and I'll see you all in the next video. Alright then, ta-da!